Welcome to the channel. In today's video we are going to have a look at how you can create a Databricks workspace using infrastructure as code. In particular, we're going to have a look at how you can create a Databricks workspace using Terraform on the AWS cloud. In the video we're going to have a look at how we can create two pipelines, one that creates a Databricks workspace and another one that tear down or destroys the workspace again when we don't need it anymore. So for instance, if you are in a development scenario and you want to minimize your cloud cost, then you can use the first pipeline to create your Databricks workspace, and then you can do your development, and then you can run the second pipeline when you don't need the workspace anymore. The outline is as follows. We will go to the official Databricks GitHub repo that has Terraform examples, and we will find an example that fits our use case. Then we are going to modify it a bit so we can use it. That involves creating an IAM user and set up some policies. We will create a GitHub Action CI/CD pipeline, or we will create two actually, one for creating a workspace and one for destroying a workspace. And finally, we're going to have a look at how they work in practice. Before we get started, you have to make sure that you actually have the Databricks on account level created. If you don't have that already, then you can follow the first tutorial video that I will link to right here and follow the steps on how to create an account in the first place. If you have this site available, so I just navigated to the accountscloud.databricks.com. From here we will go to the right, and then we will take a note on the account ID. So you can copy that and store it somewhere, and we will use it a bit later. You can now go to your preferred search engine, search for GitHub Databricks Terraform. Then probably the first one to show up would be the Databricks Terraform Databricks examples repo that will show up. Otherwise, you have the link up here. In here, Databricks has provided a range of different examples on how to create Databricks and various other helping resources, both on Azure and on AWS. It has a quite thorough explanation on how to use the examples and what the different examples will do. So what we will do in this tutorial here is actually just to take one of those modules that they have created. So the particular one we will be having a look at is, if you navigate to modules and then we scroll down to the AWS examples, and then we find the one that is called AWS Workspace Basic. So what I've done in the repo I'm making available to you as well is basically we have cloned the content within this module here. Next, we're going to have a look at what's overall included here and what small changes we will have to do in the Terraform code to make it work in your workspace, and then we will create some pipelines to actually automate it. Databricks has also provided some overall architecture and how to use the modules. You can have a look at that as well if there's something that is missing out on or not explained thoroughly during this video. Okay, so I navigated to VS Code and I have copied the AWS Workspace basic from the Databricks examples. And first we will have a look at what we need to change in this template in order to make it work in your workspace. What we will need to change is essentially what is in the Terraform tf-vars file. So that is essentially the file that contains the variables. So the first thing you need to insert, which will be particular to your use case, or to your Databricks account will be the account ID. So the one we copied in the beginning of the video, you can insert here. Then you can set up some tags for your environment if you like. I've chosen these ones. Then you should choose a region. I'm using the EU Central 1 region. And I've used a prefix, the converge prefix in my case, but you can choose something that suits your use case. And that's basically it. So what you need to change in the Terraform code is the Terraform TFVAS file. Since we want to automate this in a GitHub action workflow, what we also will need is to create a IAM role and create some policies so that they can actually execute the Terraform code in here. So for that you can navigate to the IAM folder, and here there will be a policy that has sufficient access rights to actually create the Terraform code. You could create those policies and associate it with a user programmatically. In our case, we will use the UI within the AWS console. So this JSON object here, we will insert into a policy, which we will see now. Next up is that we need to create an IAM user and an IAM policy to grant access to that user to actually be able to execute the Terraform code that we have. So first we go to users in the IAM AWS console. We will create a user, give it a name, press next again, and press create user. So this is the one I just created. We click on it here, and we can now give it some permissions policies. I will click add permissions and I will create an inline policy in this case here. I think you can do these things programmatically as well, but for this example we just use the UI here. Press on JSON, and what you can do is to copy in this Databricks Terraform policy that will give sufficient rights so that we can actually execute the Terraform code with this user. So I press next here. I can give the policy a name, so we can call it Terraform creation policy, maybe Terraform Databricks workspace creation policy. Then we can kind of understand what it's doing. All right, now we have that this user here has these permissions. All right, so in case you need to do something more advanced, you need a user that can create more components, then you might have to change these policies. The second thing we need here is to generate or create an access key. So press here, you choose it that you use it for command line interface. Press next. You can give it a small description. So we will use it for running GitHub action workflows. And then we can create the key. What you would need to do now is both to copy the access key here, and you will also need to copy the secret access key. So this one, I'm not going to show this one, but copy both of those, and we will need to insert them into our GitHub Actions secrets later. One additional thing we actually need to create is to create a service principal, and that we can do from the Databricks console. So it's a Databricks service principal. You go press add service principal, and you will give it a name. So the name we could choose is something similar to the user that we have here, and click add. This user we will grant the role of being an account admin. This is a very broad right, but this is required so we can actually manage workspaces, so basically create and destroy workspaces. So with that in place, we can go into our service principal, and you can click create secret. This will generate a client ID and a client secret that we will need to insert into the GitHub action secrets so that the pipeline has access to use this service principal. Okay, so the last thing we need in order to complete our code example is that we need to create the GitHub action workflows. So if you go to the GitHub folder, then you see that we have two pipelines, a Terraform deploy and a Terraform destroy YAML pipeline. So let's have a look at the deploy workflow or pipeline. So it will be triggered manually. There's some permissions created, and then we set some environmental variables. Later on, we will have a thorough look of how to set these variables, but for now, they are related to a Databricks account and user, and to the AWS user that we created earlier. So the content of the pipeline is as follows. So we set a working directory, so basically the code that we copied. We check out the code, we set up Terraform, and then we initialize Terraform. And here there's something important that we need to notice, namely that when you initialize Terraform, then you need to set up a backend. And in this case here, we will set up the backend to be a bucket in AWS. So what we also will need to do before we can actually run this pipeline is actually to create a bucket in your account that this basically will point to. And within that bucket, it will then maintain a Terraform state file that keeps track of the state of your of the components that the Terraform code here is maintaining. Then we can do a format check. So are the Terraform files in the correct format? We can validate is it actually valid Terraform code? And then you can do a plan. So if we ran the code, what would the actions be for Terraform to execute? And if that looks good, then we can actually apply those changes. So the last two lines here, that's actually what executes, and in this case creates the Databricks workspace and associated components and policies and other related things that are necessary for the workspace to work. All right, so before we go any further, let's just create this S3 bucket, or at least look at how you can look into. All right, so if we just for a moment go into our AWS console, then what we will need to do before we can actually execute the pipelines is to create an S3 bucket that can store this Terraform state file. In my case, I will use the following bucket. You can create your own bucket with the same name or another name, as long as you keep the name and put it into to the variable that we will set up in the GitHub actions. So in my case, if I open this this bucket here. I already have some content in there. Yours will be empty initially, but in my case, I have already been running the pipeline, so I actually already have this Terraform state file that keeps track of the latest state from the last deployment when running the pipeline. All right, so if we go back to the code, then we can also have a quick look at the destroy pipeline. So it's somewhat similar to the deploy. So we set up the same environmental variables and do checkout. We set up Terraform and we do an initialization looking at the state file. But then we, instead of the deploy, then we run the destroy command, which will tear down the workspace in this case here. So those are the two workflows that we will set up in GitHub Actions next. The last thing that remains is that we now go to GitHub. I have pushed my code to this repository. It's publicly available, so this is the one you can copy as well if you need. We go to settings, go into secrets and variables, into actions, then navigate a bit down into repository secrets. So here we need to create the following secrets. I've already created them, but let's go through them, what you need to insert. So the AWS access key ID was the access key ID that we got when we created our IAM user. So we created an access key and there was a secret belonging to that as well. So the key ID is this one, and this is where you will need to insert the secret. Then we have the AWS region. In my case, I also have that, or you can see it in the console. So the one I'm using is the Frankfurt, that's the EU central one. So that's what I will be setting that variable to. Then we have the TensorFlow state bucket. So this was the bucket that we created. So let's just see here. Here we go. So the bucket I'm using is this converge Terraform root bucket. So yeah, that's the one I will be using. If I navigate in there, I will have already a Terraform state file because I've already been running the pipelines. Yours will be empty in the first place, but after you've been running the pipeline the first time, there should be a file apparent here. So that's that one. And then you need to insert the Databricks account ID. So that was from the account console from Databricks. And then we created a Databricks service principal that was account admin, also in the account console. And there we copied the client ID, which we will insert in this one, and also the belonging secret, which will be inserted into the following variable. So that should be everything. And we are now ready to see if we can run our pipelines. So in order to see the pipelines, you can navigate to actions here. What we see on the left side is we have two GitHub actions, one to deploy and one to destroy a workspace. We will try to see if we can deploy a workspace. So I simply go here and run the workflow manually. Click here and let's see. Let's refresh this one. So here we can follow along what is going on. So it sets up Terraform. It runs, checks the format, it validates that the Terraform files looks good. And then it applies. So if you scroll down a bit, we can see here, this is the plan. It's going to create a workspace. Then it will be creating the workspace, and this will take a few minutes. Once we navigate to the account page, we can actually see that the workspace has now been created. Let's try to go into the settings. So one thing is that we had a service principal that created the workspace, which means that I'm currently logged into my current user, which does not yet have access to the workspace. So let's give access to the workspace to my personal user. All right, so let's add myself as a user and save that. All right, with myself added, I should now be able to open the workspace with my current user. Let's see if it just updates in a second. Doesn't seem quite like it yet. There we go. Okay, and I need to log back in. All right, after a few retries, it worked. So now I basically have access to my workspace here. I have access to compute. I have access to basically create a notebook. I can create a cluster to run, and I can do my development. And once I'm done at some point, I would probably like to minimize my cloud cost. I mean, one way would be to simply delete it in here. But if you have a lot of specific settings that you would like to keep from every time you create your workspace and every time you delete it, then our pipelines here come in handy. So what we can do instead of just deleting it from inside the workspace here is that we can go to GitHub Actions and we can run the destroy pipeline. So let's try to run that instead. So we run this pipeline here. All right, so about 3 minutes for it to delete, and that was basically it. Okay, that became kind of a long video today. I will work on making them more concise in the future. Any comments on how the format of the videos and how I can improve these is much appreciated as well. But I hope you liked the video and you could learn something from it, and feel free to ask questions, and the relevant links are posted below in the description. So see you around.